Following the 32 member countries of the International Energy Agency unanimously agreeing to make 400 million barrels of oil from their energy reserves available, Prime Minister Mark Carney said today that Canada doesn't have to have reserves because they're offering
arrangements in the IEA, the exporters of oil like Norway, like Canada. We don't have to have reserves because we're providing oil to the market. It's for people who are importers. They have to have reserves so that they can buffer those. It's like foreign exchange reserves. And the rules are you should have at least 90 days reserves for those importers. What we do is we provide...
Prime Minister Mark Carney just made a statement that sent shockwaves through global energy markets. Carney declared that Canada does not need strategic oil reserves because the country is a major net exporter. The timing could not be more explosive. The world is experiencing the largest oil supply disruption in history, as Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz has removed approximately 9 million barrels per day from global markets. The International Energy Agency just announced the largest emergency oil stockpile release in its 50-year history. 400 million barrels. And Canada, sitting on the world's third largest proven oil reserves, is announcing it does not need to hold emergency stocks while simultaneously committing to increase production by 23.6 million barrels. The apparent contradiction has investors, energy analysts, and competing nations scrambling to understand what Canada's actual oil strategy is. Because when one of the world's top 5 oil producers sends mixed signals during the worst energy crisis since the Gulf War, markets react violently. Start with what Carney actually said. The rules are you should have at least 90 days reserves for those importers. What we do is we provide oil to the global market. We will continue to do so because we are a safe, low risk, low cost, and increasingly low carbon exporter. Carney stated during a media conference at the Holmenkollen Sky Festival with Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Store. The context matters. 32 member countries of the International Energy Agency agreed to a coordinated release of oil stocks as the war in Iran destabilizes global supply chains. While most countries are drawing down emergency reserves, Canada and Norway, as net oil exporters, are not required to hold oil reserves under IEA rules. Instead, Canada committed to increase production to contribute its 23.6 million barrel share to help stabilize international energy markets. Carney emphasized Canada's position as a reliable energy partner during unprecedented global turmoil. From Norway's perspective, from Canada's perspective, we are low-risk producers of oil, we are low-risk producers of natural gas, Carney said. His comments came as world oil markets were reeling from the war in the Middle East, which has closed oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz, through which about 1/5 of global oil is normally shipped. Brent crude had surged roughly 80% since the conflict began February 28th, reaching nearly $120 per barrel at the start of the week before falling back to around $90 and now again rising about $110. The Strait closure triggered what consulting firms Rapid Energy Group and Wood Mackenzie called the biggest oil supply disruption in history. Here is where the apparent contradiction creates market confusion. At the World Economic Forum in Davos earlier this year, Carney declared Canada an energy superpower with vast reserves of critical minerals. He pledged to stand strong against U.S. trade threats and grow Canada's economic sovereignty through an aggressive elbows-up approach that includes expanding resource extraction. In late November, Carney signed a controversial deal with Alberta to build a new oil pipeline to the West Coast, triggering his culture minister's resignation over major environmental impacts and unanimous opposition from the Assembly of First Nations. Yet in Oslo, Carney simultaneously promoted Canada as pursuing increasingly low-carbon oil while meeting with Norwegian energy company Equinor to advance the proposed $14 billion Bay du Nord oil project off Newfoundland's coast, a project that will not produce first oil until 2031. The mixed messaging extends to policy versus practice. Environment groups in Canada are skeptical of projects like Bay du Nord, saying they contradict Canada's promise to stop subsidizing oil and gas production. Carney called it a very attractive project that Canada wants to move forward, emphasizing very low carbon oil in terms of production and transportation. When asked about Canada posting 84,000 lost jobs in February, Carney countered that the country added 84,000 net jobs in the last year and pointed to significant projects, including new military bases and the upcoming Mackenzie Valley Highway construction announced in Yellowknife. The timing of Canada's announcement amplifies market volatility. The IEA's 400 million barrel emergency release, unprecedented in scale, is already proving insufficient to stabilize prices. The United States will release 172 million barrels from its strategic petroleum reserve over 120 days, implying 1.4 million barrels per day, which represents just 15% of the supply lost due to the Hormuz closure, according to Bernstein analysts. It takes 13 days for barrels to hit the market from presidential authorization, and additional shipping time is needed before volumes reach end consumers. JP Morgan Chase commodities analysts warned that policy measures may have limited impact on oil prices unless safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz is assured. The market's reaction validates those concerns. Despite the largest reserve release in IEA history, crude prices have surged more than 17% since the announcement. Dubai crude, the pricing benchmark for Asian buyers, hit an all-time high above $150 per barrel. U.S. retail gas prices have risen more than 50 cents to a national average around $3.57 per gallon. Natural gas, jet fuel, and international oil benchmarks have all jumped significantly. IEA Executive Director Fatih Birol painted a dire picture. Middle East producers are cutting production. Refinery operations are disrupted, with major implications for diesel and jet fuel supplies, and global liquefied natural gas supply has been reduced by 20%. Global observed oil stocks currently total more than 8.2 billion barrels, the highest level since February 2021, according to IEA's March 2026 oil market report. Roughly half are held in OECD countries, of which 1.25 billion barrels by governments for emergency purposes, with a further 600 million barrels of industry stocks held under government obligation. But these reserves deplete quickly against global demand. The 400 million emergency barrels would theoretically cover just 4 days of global consumption at current rates of 105.17 million barrels per day. Even compared with normal traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, around 20 million barrels daily, the released oil equals only about 20 days of typical flows. Here's what creates the $400 billion market impact narrative. When Canada announces it does not need oil reserves, while simultaneously committing to production increases, it signals confidence that global markets can be supplied through production rather than stockpiles. But if that confidence proves misplaced, if the Iran war extends beyond current timelines, if the strait remains closed longer than anticipated, if other supply disruptions emerge, Canada's position of not holding emergency reserves could be interpreted as strategic vulnerability rather than strategic strength. Energy markets price in uncertainty. And right now, Canada's messaging provides maximum uncertainty. Are they prioritizing climate commitments by moving away from fossil fuel dependence, or are they positioning as the world's most reliable oil exporter during global crisis? The answer appears to be both simultaneously, which is exactly the kind of policy contradiction that triggers massive market volatility. Rystad Energy forecasts that a 2-month war will push Brent oil prices to $110 per barrel by April. A 4-month war could spike Brent to $135 per barrel by June. The IEA members risk depleting their stockpiles. The 400 million barrels represents 33% of member state reserves. The 172 million barrels the U.S. plans to release represents 41% of the strategic petroleum reserve. When reserves are exhausted and the strait remains closed, global markets will depend entirely on production capacity from countries like Canada and Norway. That is when Carney's statement about not needing reserves will be tested. Because the world is watching Canada navigate the impossible balance, being an energy superpower committed to climate action, while global demand for oil has never been higher. And in energy markets, confusion equals volatility, volatility equals price swings, and price swings measured in hundreds of billions become the story everyone remembers.